Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our session on mentoring and careers. Please don't be shy. You still have a chance to move forward a bit if you want. It's a big auditorium, but the session will be your session. There will be a huge opportunity for questions, so it's easier if you're closer to us. So I really liked the introduction about superheroes, and I really believe that we all have the potential to be our own superhero. It doesn't have to be toughness or invisibility. I think it could be something like being a master networker that will know the network and be able to make a difference wherever they can. That's one example. It could be having a wonderful life balance and having a great family and a great scientific family at the same time. It can be whatever you want. So I think this session on mentoring and careers really is about how to catalyze your journey towards becoming your own superhero, the superhero you want, and how you can catalyze somebody else's journey. So personally, I used to work at the London Research Institute. My name is Frank. I can't recognize any of you just now, but maybe some of you know me. So I was a postdoc here, not here at the Crick, but at Cancer Research UK. And 3.5 years ago, I switched to doing an internship at the Royal Society in science policy. And I'm now a policy advisor at the Royal Society. So if you don't know the Royal Society, it's the Academy of Sciences in the UK. So it's basically a network of fellows of the Royal Society. Some of them have Nobel Prizes. A lot of them don't, but do excellent superhero kind of science. And I also, at the same time, took up another job, which I do a few days in the year, which is to be a trainer for academics in leadership and management skills, so such as communication skills, solving conflicts, etc. And that's with HFP Consulting. So some of you might have done actually a course with HFP or with EMBO, because often you see it as the EMBO lab management course. So there's one in Cambridge, there's some in Heidelberg. So let's quickly set the frame for this session. So we've said it's a session about mentoring and careers. So this includes how to mentor, how to choose a mentor. The aims for us today would be to come away from this session with hopefully some practical tips and learnings to be mentors and to choose mentors. We have 45 minutes. Maybe a bit less now. So we'll crack on with presentations, 3 minutes from each speaker, and then after that, there'll be plenty of space for your questions. So start thinking about questions, burning questions you have. We're all responsible for the success of this session. All of us here, everyone in the room. So again, questions. And you can also tweet about the session, Spot and Mentor at Spot in London. There's a Wi-Fi guest here. And so on the panel, we've got some amazing superheroes. I'm really excited about this panel. So we've got Carolyn Moores, who's actually my PhD supervisor. So it's a nice, emotional thing for me to be here today. Because I was never at the Crick, but I got to start. It's part of my story. I've got my PhD supervisor here. We still talk. That's an achievement. So Carolyn is a group leader at Birkbeck. She started a group in 2004. She then had, she started with the BBSRC, David Philip Fellowships, and then she had a Wellcome Trust University Fellowship, and in 2014 she became a full professor. She she's academic head of the Institute of Structural and Molecular Biology Electron Microscopy Lab. So she's based at Birkbeck, as I said, and she's heading a lab that's looking into molecular mechanisms involving microtubules and the cytoskeleton. And she's using a technique you might have heard of when there were the Nobel Prize announcements, which is cryo-electron microscopy. So Carolyn is also the academic coordinator, or has been the academic coordinator of BBSRC and MRC-funded PhD fellowships. So she's been, I'm sure, in touch with a lot of students asking her burning questions. And yeah, what should I say? That's probably not. She also has an interest in science communication, and she took part in Subbox Science earlier this year. I'll move on. So we also have David Payne on the panel, who is, let me get this right, Chief Carriers Editor at Nature. So basically, he and his team deliver job-related resources for scientists in all kinds of settings. And in particular, he's responsible for Nature's career section and the excellent Nature Jobs blog and podcast. So I really invite you to go and check it out if you haven't done so already. Prior to that, he worked for BMJ for 8 years as digital editor. And he actually started his career as a journalist before that in mainstream news, and then specialized in health and science. Then we have Sue, who I also have the pleasure to know because we work together with HFP on workshops with scientists. And Sue is a specialist in working with scientists to develop leadership and communication skills, and she also provides specific workshops and trainings for women in science. So she did a PhD as well at the University of Birmingham. She did postdocs at York and Newcastle. Then she moved into science publishing, and then she started being a freelance trainer. She's been a freelance trainer for 15 years. She also worked for Norwich, so the Norwich Biosciences Institute, New World Training Coordinator, is that correct? Yeah. And I mean, you've done so many things, it's hard to cover everything. But so you work for Heidelberg, and you work really all over the world. So even this week, you were in 3 different countries. You were in Canada, in the UK, and in Italy. And you're here, I'm glad. And still you pride yourself, we can say, for having a good work-life balance. You've defined for yourself what it is. You maximize your holiday times where you can go climbing. I mean, it's really interesting, like how you can really define what you want, what's your definition of success, and achieve it. So let's crack on. I've spoken for too long. So Carolyn, do you want to start?
So I don't have any slides, but I wanted to talk mainly about supervising PhD students. I've supervised probably around 10 through my career, but what I want to say first of all is that supervising PhD students is one of my favorite things to do as an academic. When PhD students join the lab, they bring such a sort of a wonderful blend of intelligence and energy and idealism. And this is very invigorating as a supervisor. And it's such a privilege to witness their scientific evolution as they grow in confidence, maturity, and sophistication. And hopefully not too much cynicism. But what's also very interesting, I think in the UK, PhD students start their PhD relatively young. Everybody looks very young here. And so as a supervisor, what we also get to witness is some of their personal evolution as well. And so this can be some turbulent times, of course, but it's also very moving to see that personal development. And so for all of these reasons and a bunch more, actually, I have concluded that the supervisor-student relationship is extremely intense. It must be one of the more intense relationships that exist in a sort of by design in a professional environment. So why am I telling you all of this? When I think about what I value in my mentors, one of the very important things I get from them is dispassionate advice about what I think about and believe in passionately. And so because of the things I said at the beginning, I'm not sure that PhD supervisors can be completely dispassionate dispensers of advice to their PhD students by the design of their relationship. And so what I have seen works really well, or I hope works really well for PhD students in our department, is 3 different types of sources of career support. The first is actually peer mentoring. We've just introduced a buddy system for new PhD students to join in the department, because I think some of the real challenges of navigating a new research environment is just trying to work out which way is up, from where the photocopier is to how do I deal with this difficult conversation I've got to have with my PhD supervisor. So peers are really helpful in that. The second is a more formal thesis committee structure in which there are equal membership given to the student, the supervisor, often a co-supervisor and a thesis committee chair, who sort of acts a bit like is an objective observer of the progress of the research and also the progress of the research relationship, and can act a bit like a sort of graduate tutor and sort of a resource for, more independent resource of advice for PhD students. So as part of my work with as an academic coordinator in our PhD programs, I probably watched about 30 thesis committees in action. And while I might have had maybe a third of the relevant students in my office in tears at various points during the PhD, because it's a very intense experience, over 90% of those students have ultimately gone on to finish their PhD. So I find that to be quite an encouraging statistic. And then thirdly, what most university departments have now are cohorts of PhD students, either defined by funders or defined by the department, and often those cohorts will have academic and administrative leads. And these are obviously often very knowledgeable scientists. They know about the PhD program structure, but they're sort of agnostic about the career choices of the students that they have oversight over. And so they can be really important objective source of advice and enforce that time is spent on career development and activities and this kind of thing. So I find that structure to be very important. And so hopefully this gives a good structure to PhD student experience, and we are now trying to think about mapping some of those principles to postdocs researchers in our institute as well. Though that's part of the work that we're doing with respect to the RCUK Concordat for research scientists. But one of the important things that we're trying to do is make sure that basically everybody has a mentor, because I think normalizing mentoring as a way to spend time is a very important part of what the institutions, higher education institutions, should be doing, because it sort of creates the space to have the conversation that starts, what do you want from your professional life? And having that space is a really interesting and vital part of a career development plan. So this is what I was going to say.
Yes, okay. I have some slides. Shall I get up and look? Or, just while Frank's doing that, I mean, I'd see the role at Nature Careers is very much about reflecting back the profession, and as Frank said, you know, the Careers Nature Jobs blog that we have is, you know, we actively encourage people to write about their careers, about their mentoring experience, about being a mentor, being a mentee, and to ensure that actually we can sort of spread good practice there. But the thing I wanted to specifically talk about today was we're just a few weeks away from doing our biennial PhD survey. So every other year we do a pay survey, and then in the intervening years we do a graduate student survey, and we had more than 5,000 responses this year. And I have just 3 slides, but it doesn't matter if we don't have them. But I thought it was a fantastic sort of result, and I think everything in the garden is very good. People are very positive about doing their PhDs. But there were some interesting findings that we highlighted in our feature that we published a few weeks ago, and which we will follow up in 2018 with trying to support people that are being mentors and being menteed, just some learnings and about some of the gaps that people have. So there was the top level finding was, there were some concerns about the mental health of people doing PhDs, and I think of our 5,700, about 12% had actually sort of sought help for anxiety or depression caused by that study, which was an interesting finding for us. And similarly, the amount to which people are still, in a very good way interested in academic careers, but obviously on the back of that, we published quite a robustly worded editorial to say, this is, for many of you, this won't be realised, and maybe there is a learning there for people that are mentoring you that actually they need to reflect that. So again, in 2018, we'll be looking at how we can do that by supporting the health of research groups. The other thing we do at Nature, which I will just mention very briefly, is we do an annual mentoring awards, and each year we move to a different country, and our feature for 2017 is coming out next month. We chose Spain this year. And the thing that really struck me, and we can talk about, with your help, what makes a good mentor. The thing that struck me when I read the first draft of that feature earlier this week was people talked about, and you sort of alluded to it, Carolyn, dispassionate, but actually this sense of cultivating family. And I don't know how you can be dispassionate and be, sort of parental as well. I mean, to use a cliched term there. But some of the quotes from this really sort of inspired me, really. Somebody said of their mentor who won a Lifetime Achievement Award, this was a guy from Spain, he was like a big tree that provided shade, but whose canopy was not so thick that it stopped all light getting through. And I must admit, when I read that, I thought, wow, if someone ever said that about me in my career, I would think, wow, I've really done something great here. The other one was, he really made me feel that my career, there were women here, I don't know why I've chosen 2 male ones here, he really made me feel that my career was a priority for him. And it's thanks to him that my career has advanced further than I ever would have imagined. And as I say, it was in Spain this year. What was interesting about it was 2 of the Lifetime Achievement Award winners had set up their careers just after Franco had died, so they'd gone from being a dictatorship. And the people that had supported them and had nominated them said that actually the fact that they'd really put science on the map in Spain, they'd put it on the international stage, encouraged them to stay in Spain, so they sort of resisted attempts to internationalise their career because they were so inspired by the people that were mentoring them earlier in their careers. And it was a lifetime thing. It wasn't just something that stopped, when they stopped doing their PhD. I was talking to someone from Italy this week who was doing a postdoc in Harvard, had a great opportunity back in Europe and had stopped off in London on the way back from the interview to talk to her PhD supervisor about, just some advice about what she would do. And I thought that amazing connection that can last your whole career. So I won't even allude to my slides. They're up there for people to look at because I've spoken too much. But I'll pass over to Jill.
If you want.
Sue, sorry.
If you want.
Yes. There they are, really. That's just a quote from the, from the feature. PhD students are largely find their own career advice online. Just 1/3 credited advice from a supervisor as a reason for their career choice. And that's not to dis-supervise. It's actually to say what skills should supervisors have to just... we've got this thing at Nature about alternative careers. We don't like it as a term. We'd like to banish it because actually what is an alternative career? I've had many different tracks in my own career. Maybe just the other slide, Frank. There was the first one actually. Is there another one there? This one, yeah. So this is a quote from our editorial that generated this huge debate on Reddit. Simply put, most PhD students need to make plans for life outside academic science, and more university and PhD advisors must make this clear. So it would be great to get your views on that and what we can do at Nature Jobs to support that process. So I'm going to pass it over to Tina. Thank you.
Thank you, David. So before I start, Frank's asked me to talk about advice about how to do it. But I'm interested to know from the people in the audience. So if you are a PhD student, put your hand up. Okay. If you're a postdoc, put your hand up. If you are a supervisor looking after PhD students, put your hand up. Okay, so a couple. And if you're doing something else completely different, put your hand up. Ooh, that's brilliant. That's brilliant. So, some how-tos and to start off, picking up some of the things that both David and Carolyn have said around. I think the important thing about mentoring is that mentoring is actually, as we've seen here with Frank and Carolyn, is a relationship that can go on for a long time. So if it's done well, then that's really, really good for the future of your network. And the skills are skills that we already have. So who here has a younger sibling? Hands up. Who's a parent? Hands up. Okay. Who's ever taught anybody to do anything? Hands up. So you can already do it. You already know how to do it. So mentoring is about helping people achieve things for the future, helping them be successful, helping them to feel happy and to feel confident in what they're doing. So all the skills that you use as a parent to help people to get on to teach things to people, as an older sibling, helping your siblings along with their life, you already know how to do this. So mentoring is about listening. It's really, really important to listen to find out what the other person needs. And then it's about sharing all of those things that you have, your experience, your contacts, and also, more importantly, your belief in that person's ability to achieve. And from the other side of the relationship, if you are seeking a mentor, the most important thing really for you is to work out what you need that mentor for. What do you want from that relationship? Do you want somebody that's just going to actually give you some hints and tips scientifically? Do you want somebody that's going to pick you up when you've had a really bad week and none of your experiments have worked? Do you want somebody that can give you advice about a career that is different from the person who is supervising you at the moment? So one of the other things about mentoring is people talk about, oh, I've got this mentor. I want you to think about having more than one mentor. I want you to think about having several mentors. Because if you want to think about a career that is different from the people who are around you every day, you need to talk to somebody else about that. And you need to find out who knows and who can help you with that. So your skills in finding a mentor are really about thinking about what you want from the relationship and where you want to go. And that's not always easy. I work a lot with PhD students who say, I haven't got time for that. Postdocs are telling me I'm writing applications, I haven't got time to think about where I want to go. But actually you need to think about that because you need to be planning for the future. So all of the skills that you've learnt to date are very relevant in terms of mentoring. So wanting to help people is more important than actually worrying about, am I doing it right? Because you will be helping just by listening. So I'll talk a bit more about that. If anybody wants to talk to me over coffee, I can do that. So I'll hand back to you.
Thank you very much. So over to you. Questions? Sweet.
It should be on. Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
It's Elizabeth Moyman from BMC. That's a really lovely oversight into the different things that mentees can benefit from. What do you think's in it for the mentor?
Carolyn?
Well, today I wouldn't be here having this interesting conversation without my relationship with my mentee. I think at the moment of early career development, there's a lot. My benefit is the nurturing and the seeing people mature. This is hugely rewarding. And if you invest in those relationships at that moment, it's impossible to predict what benefits can come for the mentor in the future, because everybody can teach everybody something, and being open-minded about that, I think, is just an infinite possibility. Offers infinite possibilities.
My take on that is one of the things that's in it for you as a mentor is that sense of making a difference in the world, making a difference for somebody, which is, as Carolyn has said, is hugely rewarding. The other thing, and this is something that I find from PIs all of the time, is that they breathe a great sigh of relief. If you can mentor the people around you well, PhD students, postdocs, other people that you're working with in the lab, then what you're actually doing is you're creating more time for yourself. So if you can create independence and confidence in your team, that means you've got more time to get on and do the things that only you can do, whereas they're less likely to come knocking on the door all the time wanting help. So I think that's a really, really important part of mentoring and thinking about what's in it for you as a mentor.
That's right. And if I can tag on to that to add a bit of personal story, when I was in the middle of my PhD and at the end of the second year, I remember once in our meeting asking Carolyn, so I could go down that way or do this kind of experiment and explore that sort of branch or do that. What do you think, Carolyn? And she said, well, what do you think? You know, and at the time I thought, well, this is really annoying. I want the answer. Give me the answer. But actually, now I'm really glad she didn't give me the answer because I owned that project. I owned what I did. And she said, that's your project. I want you to do what you really want. And then, of course, she didn't disappear and come back for the PhD viva. She was there all along in the journey, but she asked me the questions. She coached me rather than give me the answers. So coaching is really important too as a mentor to ask the questions. So what do you want to do? What is your goal? Like it's a tough question, but it's important. And then how are you going to go about doing that? What are your resources? Or have you read that paper? Or, it's almost giving the answer sometimes, but it's not, and it makes a big difference. David, did you want to?
Yeah, it's just the most flattering thing to be in the world, I think, to be asked to be a mentor. And I was on my way here today actually, and I got a text message from a former colleague of mine. We've never sort of said we are, I am mentoring. I don't, it's not like that, but it's, there's a workplace situation going on there that I've been sort of listening to, and actually, hopefully doing what you just said, which is, what would you do, and throwing it back and encourage options to be discussed. And it's just there's a lot in it. And I was at a thing at the CRIC the other week where we talked about reverse mentoring. And again, the idea that a senior person can get together some junior colleagues. And just really learn from them as well about how to deal with certain situations. That's another topic that I hope we'll explore in the Nature Careers section in 2018. So I think it's a win-win, if I'm honest.
Another question?
Hi, Lily from here at the CRIC. I just wanted to say, we've spoken a lot about these good mentoring relationships where, in the future you're going to go back and see your supervisor. But there is also a lot of times when the relationships go bad, and for some reason or another, the PhD student is very glad to, for example, be escaping their supervisor. I just wanted to sort of think what your thoughts are on how to turn a bad mentoring relationship round, or whether it's worth just sort of ditching that sort of thing and then going on to the next one. Sort of how do you deal with those negative situations?
Where do you want to start?
I don't know. Sue, you want to start?
Because I've got the mic. Thank you, Lily. And I think it's really important that we are realistic, that not everybody has all lovely roses relationship with their supervisor. This is the real world. But I think sometimes the opportunity to understand that relationship is going to possibly be over after the end of 3 or 4 years can be helpful. And also, if the relationship goes bad, I think it's really useful to work out how have I contributed that, whether I'm the mentor or the mentee, and where has it gone bad? What is the situation that's causing the badness, if you like? Because when I talk to people and we run sessions on how to deal with difficult people, then the difficulties are legion, they're huge. So how you describe the relationship and where it's gone bad, I think is important in understanding how to fix it. Carolyn?
Yeah, I guess, as I said, the intensity in a supervisor-student relationship can be good intense and bad intense. And it's very, of course, a function of the two people involved and what each wants out of the situation. I think the hope is that both enter into a contract with each other saying, the student says, I want a PhD, and the supervisor says, I'm going to supervise you getting a PhD. The methodology to getting to the end can be joyous and it can be ugly. But I suppose when it's difficult, I would always return to the why am I here? I want to get a PhD. Okay. I don't agree with the methodology that's being proposed to me, but where can I navigate myself so it's okay? But But that's also why I wanted to emphasize the value of people outside the relationship. The graduate tutors in your department, the other students who can give you some emotional support. Those people are there exactly to diffuse some of the intensity. And if necessary, to step in and say, that is not okay. And those are uncomfortable relationships, or those are uncomfortable conversations, but when mental health in particular is at risk, those conversations have to be had. And I think most administrators and graduate tutors in departments understand that that's one of the reasons why they're there.
Just to clarify, my relationship is great with my supervisor.
Hi there, my name is Benjamin Schuster. I'm a group leader at the Big Institute in Oxford. So that rang a bell because I've supervised myself about 3 students so far, another one now, but I've been involved with the supervision of a number of other students because that's the only purely computational research group in the department. Often when people do work that's partly computational, they come to me, they join my group meetings, so I talk to them a lot. And there have been a few cases where people, usually within the first year of their PhD, run into a point where they feel, oh, this project is not what I imagined it to be. The atmosphere in the lab is not what I imagined it to be. The relationship with my supervisor is not what I imagined it to be. So I think in those cases, I think it's important to first figure out what is the problem, as you earlier said. But I think it's also important to seek out other people who you might be able to talk to, which kind of goes back to what some of the panels earlier saying, like find not just one mentor, have multiple mentors. And then there are conversations where you can sort of figure out, is it just a matter of you not feeling that, not having the confidence in the project, but maybe you don't have the horizon as a student to really understand that there is a good chance that this will be a successful project, but you just have to crack on with it, or whether there is something more fundamentally wrong, at which point, hopefully, within your institution, there is some mechanism of either changing supervisor or changing project. And I've seen that happen too, and it can actually turn into then a really good, successful PhD. But if I can kind of tag on a different question to that. So what if all of that fails, basically? That's something that I still don't really know how to deal with. Because in a way, at the moment, the situation is such that people come in as PhD students with relatively little exposure, neither to the lab that they go into, or also the lab. I mean, as a supervisor, I might have interviewed them very briefly, but then they come to start working for me. And at that point, it's almost like a 4-year interminable contract, very unlike a work relationship where you would have a probationary period. And you might say at some point, look, we tried it, but this just doesn't work out. And in a PhD context, it's very hard to do. So is there something structurally not quite right about how we, organize the way that students come into that?
Who wants to take that difficult question?
In terms of the audition process, let's say, for supervisor and student and project, this is the sciences involved as well. I think rotation periods help a lot. Because you do get the flavour of what, because I think a lot of, or some of what happens is that, let's say a student arrives in my lab and they want to do electron microscopy, they heard it's got a Nobel Prize, and then they discover that actually you have to sit in the dark for several days of the week. And
your office is in the basement.
And your office in the basement. So you have, yes. And so... and we're joking about it, but some people really, that would be a horrible thing to spend their time doing. So no matter how inspired they are by the science, they probably shouldn't come to my lab. So the rotations definitely help. And this is, of course, we're talking about the personality things as well. I feel like I had another point to make, but I've lost track, so I'm going to hand it back.
Okay. Thanks for your question. I think all of us realise, maybe those of us that are further on in our careers, that we're working within a flawed system. There are many things in the scientific system that don't really work very well. What I have certainly seen is that things have improved. So I think that the more that we can build an understanding outside of the lab about what doing a PhD is about. So things that I have seen that work well are bringing school students in for visiting times, for summer schools, so they can get a sense of it. Rotations, as Carolyn said, work really, really well. I think the other important thing is to, as supervisors, to take responsibility for equipping ourselves with the skills around looking after and communicating with people, rather than just focusing on the things that have to be done for the science and the process. And I think that is one of the things that can really help in terms of allowing this person to land and for you to build a relationship with them that will work over that time that they're with you. This is not to say that the PhD student themselves doesn't also have that responsibility as well, but I think the responsibility is with the supervisor to actually help that person learn the interpersonal skills and have the interpersonal skills yourself to be able to manage that relationship. I think it's really, really important.
I don't know how we're doing for time. I mean, I concur with everything you say, and I love the idea of two mentors. It actually got mentioned a couple of days ago at a team meeting we were having at Nature, so the idea that you can talk to other people. As ever, I can only kind of reflect it back on content we published, which earlier this year we did a column about a PI in a very large lab who wrote a column called supervisor phobia, which really sort of set the world alight, and there was lots of negative comments on social media about why we published it. I think it was a very interesting comment about how he dealt with somebody who wouldn't engage, and but if I could do anything differently with that, I wished I'd got them both together and co-authored the article, because I think if we had been able to identify the person that he was talking about, that would have been so much more a better piece of service journalism, because he should have been the grown-up there and should have actually sort of facilitated more conversations and not just lazily relied on the person turning up. And just been a little bit more sort of open, I would have said. So that was a learning for me.
It's really helpful comments and ideas, actually. And I want to just give a story of a friend who was in a really bad lab. I mean, like, had a case of a really bad supervisor, and so basically that supervisor was a bit of a bully and started suggesting having lab meetings on a Saturday morning. And some people wouldn't say no because they were too afraid. And of course you completely understand, because the supervisors are so powerful. They've got this power over one person because the career of the person depends on them. It's, you have to be mindful of that when you're a supervisor, I think. And some people said no, but okay. At the end of the day, the supervisor, might listen only to their peers. And that's where I think that's really important. When you're another group leader and somebody is a bully in your department, you can send them a text and say, hey, it's not legal what you're going to say, or it's not okay to suggest lab meetings on a Saturday morning. And that's what happened. And that's how the lab meetings were not set to Saturday morning. So we all have a responsibility, and you can influence the culture in your lab, but you can influence the culture beyond your lab as well. And you should do it, I think. Another question, because I want to take one last question, hopefully a bit more positive.
Elizabeth from Is this on? No. Shout as well. It's like shout as well. I'm Elizabeth from University College London, and I do a lot of work with setting up mentoring schemes. And I was wondering if you had any opinions about how best to match mentors and mentees, whether the mentee chooses themselves, whether you match for them because you think you might stretch them a little bit, whether it's within their field of research or outside their field, etc.
Thank you. Who would like to take this one?
I'll start because I've got the microphone.
It's
like
power.
musical chairs here. I know. So my recommendation to you is that you go across the road to the British Library, where they have an exhibition on at the moment that's called The History of Magic. And I think that is the best way to work out how to match mentors and mentees. I think I've been involved with quite a lot of these, and I think that some of them work really, really well, some of them don't. And part of it is down to the skill of the matching by making sure you ask the right questions to start with, to find out what skills your mentors have, and what your mentees think they need. Now, I think we need more investment in helping the mentees to find out what they need, and that then gives us a better opportunity to match them with the mentors, because the mentors are further on in their careers and should be aware of what they have to offer. So I think we maybe need to invest more time in working with the mentees to help them define what it is that they need. And I also think that the best thing is to have a review process that enables those people in those relationships to get out of them and to get a new one, mentee or mentor, without any fault on either side if either of them don't feel that it's working. And I think over time, working within a system, I don't know how long you've been doing this at UCL, you will get to know the people that you have as mentors and who they might be suited to, and it actually then gets easier to match, I think.
I can give a personal example that at the Rose Society, my land manager said, "Oh, you know, I've got a mentor who's like in a more senior role. That might be something I want to do later. Not exactly the same thing, but they can help me. They've got some sort of expertise, but also they can coach me." And I did the same. Then I said, okay, informally I can approach that person. And then we did a small contracting, and we said, okay, if the relationship works, fine. If it doesn't work, then we can stop. I mean, it's a fluid thing, but it's important to have this small contracting and agreement.
I mean, the only thing I would add is that our observation in the normal day-to-day working of an academic department is that someone said it earlier, that there isn't always time made for mentoring relationships. And so I don't say that it's the final answer, but sometimes enforcing mentoring relationships so that everybody has a mentor, it may not work out, can at least start the conversation. As Sue says, you then want to maybe frame a way in which the relationships can be exited, because that's pretty random, but at least it makes sure that the mentoring happens.
So with this, I would like to, I mean, if that's okay.
Yes.
Did you want to add something, Sue? No. I don't want to hold you off from coffee and your break, but I want to say our speakers are here. They will continue taking your questions. I just want to say before we wrap up, give a final opportunity, like maybe 30 seconds maximum for each speaker to say something.
I actually already said mine. It was I was going to. You mentioned this, Frank, but the quote that I read out earlier was the thing I wanted to end on. Actually, it's the the idea of light through a tree as a kind of analogy for mentoring. I'm going to keep reading that, and whenever I'm mentoring colleagues, I'll be thinking of it always.
Yeah. So I'd underline that. I said, go and be a tree and go and sit in the light that's filtering through above that tree. Do both of those things.
I agree.
Do I have to do something that rhymes with tree and agree? So the Rose Society has done some work called Changing Expectations, and they've done some case studies. There's actually somebody from the CRIC there, Maria Ocampo, Afala, I think her name is, who was a postdoc, then a scientific officer, and then is now lab manager in the outreach team here at the CRIC. And there's a lot of case studies of people who have moved in and out of academia. It just shows you how big your tree can be. And yes, there are leaflets for that, and I'll leave them on a table by registration near the coffee. It's not quite tree or agree, it's coffee. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much to the panel. So thank you, David, Sue, Carolyn and Frank for such a fascinating discussion. It's time for coffee now, but if anyone's interested in writing up this session or writing a post around the things that we've picked up from today's panel, please do get in touch with me, because we're looking for contributors to our blog. So thank you. Coffee.